Midnight. Current. Chapter 1. The Outage. At 3:07 a.m., the city woke inside a dead man's dream. Dewey watched the grid die from the 18th floor of the Municipal Dispatch Center, where blinking panels mapped Saigon's pulse in green and amber. For months the pattern had been precise. District 5, a wedge sown with narrow alleys, open-air markets, and jade-tinted temples, dropped into darkness for exactly 9 minutes and 13 seconds. When the lights returned, no alarms tripped, no overload recorded. The power simply returned as if pulled away and then released, like breath. He traced it on the screen, little diamonds collapsing to black, pagodas of light blinking out in rippling streets. The outage line traced itself like handwriting he almost recognized. Every time, the same shape, looping from the old colonial hospital near THAN Phong Dao to the defunct substation behind it and back, a cursive letter that refused erasure. "Again?" said Quian, the night dispatcher, stirring instant coffee that smelled like wet cardboard. "It's your ghost hour, Ann Dewey." He didn't glance up. "It's not a ghost, it's a leak." "Leak? Ghost, it's the same when the fish stall can't make ice." She squinted at the wall clock. 9 minutes, 13 seconds. Same as always. And on the spectrum analyzer fed by the substation's telemetry, a sine wave hummed at 50 hertzes, the heartbeat of the grid. Then something else stirred underneath. A high-altitude mosquito whined behind the familiar pulse, a second note just out of hearing, 15.777 kilohertzes, where no one in the system had any business singing. He had written it on a post-it where only he would see 15,777. A number like a phone you once dialed 1,000 times, now tattooed under the tongue. "Go home," Quian said. "Sleep. Let the morning team worry. I'll pass by the site." He zipped his jacket. Outside, a monsoon fidgeted at the window. "I won't be able to sleep anyway." And nay, he was afraidy and Oz. The rumor began 2 months ago at a fur stall. A woman swore her television turned on by itself at 3:07, showing the weather from 1974. A shopkeeper said his electric shutter rolled up to the sound of stifled crying, soft, like a child instructing herself not to be heard. A moto boy said his phone mapped a street that no longer existed. "It told me to turn right into a wall," he insisted, eyes wet with sleepless bravado. Dewey did not treat rumors lightly. Power behaved like memory. It took the easiest path, repeated its mistakes, and flooded where it had once been allowed to flood. He had watched his father, a lineman, climb poles at the edge of storm season and swear that lightning held grudges. When Dew was 8, his father's palms returned from a fall with half the lines of life shaved off. After that, the man laughed too loudly, as if arguing with a silence only he heard. When Dewey was 17, his father did not come home from a simple job out in the marshes. "A misstep," the supervisor said. "A wet rung. A bad day." But Dew woke that night at 3:07, the roof fan hiccuping, and heard he still swore he heard his father call down the stairwell once. A calling not for help but permission. The city didn't go out that night, just his room, as if the darkness had come personally to shake his bed frame. He drove a white company van through streets emptied by rain's soft insistence. Shrines shone under awnings, little red mouths opened to swallow incense. Strung wires sagged between lampposts like slack jump ropes, a net thrown over the waking fish of the streets. He turned where the map did not need to tell him and parked behind the hospital, where a wall of humidity pressed close, the rain forming a silver film between him and everything else. The hospital had long evacuated to a new glass shell closer to the highway. The old building squatted like a thoughtful animal, its lion motifs cracked along the snout, rust traced down from shuttered windows a dozen orange tears. The substation behind it, Station 17, crouched in a rectangle of chain link. Its door had a new padlock over deep scratches, as if someone had picked it 100 times with fingernails. He killed the engine, letting the rain form a hush. Somewhere a cat yowled. Somewhere music played thinly from a room so far away it seemed underwater. He checked his phone. 3:03 a.m. He pulled on his gloves and opened the substation. Inside, metal rack faces, breakers like gray knuckles, the smell of old dust and ozone. He had already run simulated loads, swapped out relays, replaced a panel whose diodes cast a tired green. Tonight he had brought something else. A small, old tuner his father used to keep, battered and precise, and a loop antenna he had built from a braver part of himself. He clipped the tuner's ground to the cabinet, coax snaking like a tame eel. He set the dial to the neighborhood of 15 kilohertzes. He closed his eyes, listening for static like rain on a tin roof. He felt the minute approach not in the clock but in the tightened skin of the world, in how everything seemed to attend, like the city had leaned forward to hear. 3:07 a.m. clicked into the paneled room without ceremony. The grid hiccuped. His handheld showed it. District 5's lights winked out, one after another, a chain of eyelids closing. Inside the substation, the transformer's hum changed timbre, a note bent by a ghost finger. In the headphones, the tuner whispered something, a knit of hiss pulled into pattern, a faint staccato like a woman teaching a child to say numbers ba, num, bay, bay. He swallowed. The numbers were Vietnamese. The voice had the compressed, paper-thin quality of old radio. "Hello?" he said into a room with no one else in it. In his ear the voice continued, the pattern repeating, 15, 7, 7, 7, 15. On the analyzer, a sliver rose like a small flag at 15.777 kilohertzes. The station was speaking. He looked through the rain at the hospital. The second-floor windows glowed with no visible source, like water caught in a jar under moonlight. He knew the building was dead, its switchgear disconnected, its panels derelict, but the hall beyond the window showed a cold fluorescent rectangle, then another, lighting in a ripple down the corridor, as if someone walked beneath motion sensors. Dewey unlatched the gate before he asked himself what he was doing. He crossed the concrete to the service door, rust treatment blistering like leprosy. On his key ring, the old service key they never took back hung from a chipped porcelain tag, 17. He tried it. The lock resisted with a gout of flakes. Then, like a tired throat clearing, it turned. The door opened into a cool that smelled not of mold but of antiseptic, as if someone had just mopped, as if the past had held its breath all this time. "Hello?" he said again, and his voice went nowhere, snagging on reflective paint and tile. He stood in the corridor with the sense that eyes were adjusting to him rather than the reverse. On the right, a nursing station sat in patient sightlines, glass-fronted and pale. A wall calendar curled like a dead insect. June 1974. A bouquet of badly drawn lotus flowers. On the desk lay a ledger with a green spine and a ballpoint pen tethered by a piece of cotton string. The pen was uncapped. Its tip had dried into a pinhead scab long ago. He stepped closer, and in the ledger, on the left-hand page under electricity usage and complaints. A neat blue line of entries stopped on June 3, a last line reading 3:07 a.m. Corridor lights flicker. Pediatric ward crying. He touched the string of the pen and felt heat, as if someone had held it within the last minute. Then he saw the next entry ink itself as he watched, neat script rising like a sweat, the nib moving without a hand. 3:08 a.m. complaint filed. Technician contacted. Dewey. The world held very still. He stared at his name, perfectly spelled. People misspelled his name all the time, changed the shape of the tongue to English or to the version the tax office liked, with accents ignored. But this was die with its proper curl. He lifted the book and saw dust plumes like breath after each page. The entry's ink glistened as if heat still walked its wet belly. It had started with a phone call 2 weeks ago, a landline you could feel with your finger along the body memory. He had answered, and there had been only rain, then a woman's voice, distant, using a tone reserved for children and fear. Don't turn it off, please. Not yet. He had thought prank. He had thought of the hotline the department had for suicides and for those convinced their toaster wanted to kill them. He had said the calm phrases, which substation cheat? Which meter? Tell me your address. The woman had begun to cry, not loud, and the line had filled with a small bed springs creaking, a lullaby tune sung off-key. Now, in his father's headphones, the same lullaby ran under the number's station hum. The particular wrongness came from how the high note fell too early each time, a habit he'd heard mothers drum into their babies to soften crying into breathing. He followed the corridor, past a bathroom door that held a gash down its center, as if someone had gone through it in a hurry with a cart or a body, past a wall whose paint bubbled in the shape of the tubes that had once slept behind it. The pediatric ward waited with half its bed still made. A paper mobile of birds hung motionless from a hook. In the corner, a ceramic frog bank smiled to no one. Wind moved down the corridor, but none touched his cheek. He knew he was not alone well before he saw her, because the surfaces took on courtesy, like when you step into a room where someone is sleeping and every object becomes careful. She stood at the end of the hall, one hand on a light switch. Her white uniform looked cut from the wall, too clean against too clean. Her hair was pulled back into a knot that let fly a small mad wing behind one ear. Her attention rested wholly on him, the way a person's attention can be a hand on your chest, testing the rise and fall. "You're late," she said in Vietnamese, voice steady, as if being late were one more fact in a world of facts. The babies cry when the lights go strange. Dewey's throat worked. He had rehearsed a dozen rational openings, security, vandalism, squatters, but what he said was, "What is your name?" "Hoa," she said. "Don't cut power. Not yet." The exact words from the phone. He forced breath to move in a rhythm like solder smoking. The grid drops for 9 minutes 13 seconds every night. "Do you know why?" She slid her hand over the light switch, not flipping it. "Because a mother is learning how to disappear." Thunder walked the roof on soft feet. The fluorescence shivered. The sound of rain came and went as if carried in someone's coat. "I don't understand," he said. There was a fire. She watched him not like a stranger, but like a repeating visitor she loved with a kind of politeness reserved for the dangerous. "No, not a fire. A smell like coins. A sound like you've stood too quickly. It started when they moved the lines. New boxes, new promises." The ward complained. Lights flicker. Children cry. The technician said, "We'll cut to test." "Just 9 minutes," he said. 13 at most." That's what you said. I didn't say that. His mouth felt untrustworthy. His father had said things like that, though, with a gentle authority that made people nod, then curse him when he left. You, she repeated, not with anger, but as if pronouncing an address. They had swaddled him in a blanket with ducklings. He had a small hole above his lip, like someone had aimed very carefully and missed. The mother didn't like anyone saying deformity because he fed well. When you cut the power, the air stopped for him. The battery failed. The nurse ran. The mother did not run. She rose without her legs. The rubber floors remembered the shape of her feet. He staggered against the wall. In the papermobile, a blue bird turned once as if breathed upon. I didn't cut power, he said, but he did not know who he was talking to, this woman, the ledger, the city, himself. Hoa stepped closer, and in her eyes he found a calm he recognized, the way people go very quiet when the worst thing has already happened. She became a line, she said, not a woman anymore, not a ghost yet, a line that insists on being completed. For 9 minutes and 13 seconds, she comes back and asks you not to cut her. For 9 minutes and 13 seconds, the ward turns inside out and becomes again June. The babies cry, the numbers sing, the city holds its breath, and then she is cut again. Lightning grazed the window. His handheld flickered with a color it had no business displaying, something between gold and rot. Why the number? He asked. 15777? Hoa tilted her head, listening not to him but to the ceiling. In the new boxes, the old man in charge wrote his birthday to test. He said, numbers are friendly, the mother heard. She learned the shape. She folded herself into it because the door was that shape. Who are you? He asked carefully. Are you alive? Right, see. She smiled in a way that forgave him for making sighs out of the wrong kind of question. I'm on duty, she said, with the pride of someone who owns a night. We were not evacuated. They said Friday we would leave. It was Tuesday. Waiting is a kind of work people forget to thank you for. If you cut the power now, she will be trapped in a tighter circle. You're an electrician. You know what happens when a loop becomes smaller than a finger. It burns. She will become small enough to hide in a headphone, in a child's toy, in a light switch nobody checks. She will learn to go where people love something, because love is where power clings longest when it dies. Outage, he thought of his father's palms, the shaved-down lifelines, the way the man's voice sounded on the last weeks like a radio tuned between two stations. He thought of his own phone ringing 2 weeks ago at night, and of his mother's old voice he had called her by accident, and of how she had hummed him a lullaby when he apologized, wordless but precise. How do I stop it? He asked. I can't leave the city looping itself into this. We aren't built for daily hauntings. He tried for lightness and failed. His voice came out with a tinny edge. Owa considered. The fluorescence blinked once off, then on in perfect unison down the corridor. Not flicker, but decision. You can't stop it by cutting. That's what made it. You can only complete the line in another way. You must give her what she waited for. The technician's apology? He said, skeptical and hoping. No, Hoa said. The child's breath. His mouth went dry. He died. She doesn't believe in the past tense the way you do. If you carry breath the right kind down the line, she can follow it out. There is a fan room behind the pediatric ward. When you were a child, did your father ever teach you to make a motor sing without a source, a coil and a magnet, hands and patience? He taught me to make a radio from scrap, he said, Perplexed by the memory's warmth in this refrigerator of a hall, he said, "If you love a signal, it will come out of the air to meet you halfway. Then you know," she said gently, "how to teach a mother to come out of a wall." He found the fan room exactly where his gut told him. Two great snail housings crouched against cement, ducks leading away like veined wings. Dust lay on every surface. In the egalitarian way, time loves no more for doctor than for patient. He put his flashlight down. He opened the service panel and passed wires across terminals in the way electricians do when they do not entirely trust diagrams. He pulled a coil from his kit and rewound it with a patience he did not know he still owned. He laid the loop antenna on the fan housing, a listening ear against an old lung. In his headphones the numbers station sang. Between its notes he coaxed a tone at the edge of bodies where newborns first decide the world is tolerable. He adjusted the coil until the tone settled like a bird landing on a small rafter. "Now," Hoa said behind him, voice warm, as if speaking from just behind his left shoulder. The hair on his neck stood in eager attention. "Breathe." He laughed, surprised by the word, then obeyed. He drew in air that tasted of antiseptic apology and exhaled past his teeth into the loop, imaginarily, like blowing across a bottle's mouth. He imagined the breath not as air but as permission. In the corridor, someone began to hum. He recognized the lullaby immediately, and without meaning to, he found his mother's version in his own throat. They had never lived near this hospital. They had never known this ward. But the tune had a way of passing down any stairwell, finding kitchens and coils and men who did not know how to say what broke them, the analyzer whispered. The 15.777 kilohertzes flagged, then flattened, then rose again on a new path. He felt it rather than measured it the way a stubborn screw finally aligns, the way certain doors give when you change the angle of your hand. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." And Cluj. The air shifted. The fluorescence no longer glowered. The ward's little oxygen meters, dead since long before he was born, blinked green, then circled to nothing, like eyes closing after a joke no one else heard. He saw the coil's thread quiver as if plucked. The loop antenna registered a pressure, then released with a sigh that did not move the dust but moved something in him that had been chalk for years. "Is it?" he began. Hoa touched his elbow. The contact was ordinary and therefore terrifying. "She will find the door if you hold it open." "How long?" 9 minutes, 13 seconds, she smiled. "You taught her that." He wanted to ask 1,000 things. He wanted to ask if she would still be here when the lights came back. He wanted to ask whether she had a family, whether she had stayed by choice, whether duty could become a place to live as much as a thing to leave. He wanted to ask whether the ledger would write his name again tomorrow. He wanted, absurdly, to ask what to do with his hands when he was not working. "Will you?" he began. And then he heard footsteps down the corridor, light as if uncommitted to the floor. He turned. A woman moved towards them, carrying nothing. Her hair hung damp and dark as if recently washed, slicked to her forehead like a thought not yet spoken. She was neither young nor old in the way grief equalizes. Her bare feet made a soft applause on rubber tile. She did not look at him. She looked at the coil in his palm as if it were a crib. "I heard the fan," she said, softly, like a mother trying not to wake her own heart. "I heard someone breathing." "Come," Hoa whispered. The woman stopped before the panel. Her lower lip trembled just once, the way a circuit can nearly fail and then decide. "Is he awake?" she asked, and Du knew she was asking the world, not him. "Follow the breath," Hoa said. Out. The woman closed her eyes. Her hands tightened into a shape without object, like a person remembering a child exactly, and refusing to open them in case the memory took the opportunity to run. "Thank you," she said to the air, to the fan, to the coil, to the numbers, to the person whose name had walked out of a ledger by itself. "Thank you." The pressure in the room changed. The rain outside paused as if instructed. The coil hummed with a tone that made Dewey's teeth ache in a clean way, like cold water. And then the woman exhaled. She walked forward into the blank door of the fan housing as if it were the mouth of a tunnel she had always known was there. She did not vanish with drama. She did not sparkle. She passed into the housing the way a smell leaves a room, the way a tune leaves your ribs. Her heel was the last to go. The coil rang like a struck bowl and settled. The hallway seemed longer than it had a minute ago. The fluorescence warmed like first tea. "Did it?" he began. Hoa's face was wet. "That was polite of you and Di," she said. "It is good for a city to remember its dead have roots also." He stood there with his coil and his father's headphones and felt that he had used the wrong muscles his entire life to carry certain things. He waited for the usual return of embarrassment, of the world telling him he had been stupid to believe in invisible music. It did not come. Behind them, the ledger began to write again, pen moving without hand. 316A. M. Complaint resolved. Technician present. Dewey. "Will it keep happening?" he asked. "Tomorrow again?" Hoa looked not down the corridor but up towards the ceiling, the roof, the sky, something beyond. When people find doors, they prefer to exit than to repeat. He smiled, a small, tired thing. "And you?" "I'm on duty," she said, the pride back in place. "There are other mothers, other coils, other technicians who think cutting is the only language a switch understands. Stay for a moment." She glanced at his chest like a doctor listening to lungs. "Then go. Find your father somewhere where the air is good." His phone buzzed a vibration so ordinary it made the hair on his arms bark. He looked down. The screen said, "Incoming call." Dewey, his own number. He lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" A voice like his mother's, from another room in the same house. "Don't turn it off," she said softly, old fear moving under the words like a fish under paper boats. "Please, not yet." The ward's lights flickered once, twice, with an almost human stutter. The loop antenna vibrated in his palm. A humming rose in the floor that carried the cadence of train wheels on rails, an impossible memory. The hospital, which had not had rail lines anywhere near it, seemed to lean, as if carriages were passing silently through bones. "Can you hear me?" he asked, but the voice had flattened into rain. He lowered the phone. Hoa did not speak. Her eyes were on the window at the far end of the corridor, where rain ran in perfect vertical strings, as if someone had combed it. Then, all at once, the rain stopped. Not tapered, stopped. The city took in a breath that did not belong to it. Every light in the ward went out. He stood in a darkness so complete it was like velvet pressed over a face. He could hear nothing but one thing. Footsteps. Not near him, below, then above, then beyond. The kind of footsteps that circled a building without touching stairs. He fumbled for his flashlight. "Don't," Hoa said quietly in the dark. "Wait." He waited. A thin light grew that was not his. Starlight. But the hospital's windows framed not sky. There was no sky through those interior panes, only the suggestion of constellations where hallway paint should have been. The constellations formed shapes he recognized not from the night, but from the panels he opened each day. A ladder of resistors, a constellation of switches, a galaxy in the precise symmetry of a breaker diagram. The ceiling became a star map of circuits. In the space above them, the city showed its skeleton. "Do you see it?" he whispered. "Yes," she said. The backup sky. The floor vibrated lightly, as if someone had flipped the wrong switch in the firmament. Panels along the hall began to pop open with soft, careful noises, as if gremlins polite as librarians were examining the building's secrets. Somewhere a door he had thought sealed forever sighed open an inch, then an inch more. His flashlight, still in his hand, warmed without being on. The coil hummed as if fed by hands he could not see. The ledger's pages turned themselves, a small wind sitting at the desk and making tidy work. In the stars of the circuit ceiling, one line glowed brighter, tracing itself from the fan room, through walls, down shafts, into the substation behind the hospital. It drew itself onto his retina with the ease of a sin confessed. In his mind's hand he reached for the main breaker that controlled the lot. "Wait," Hoa said again, more urgently. "They are not all through." He drew his hand back from the imagined lever. In the brightness above, figures moved. Not figures. Impressions like breath against glass. He thought of his father's hands on a pole in the rain, wetlands bright and unhappy under him, his boots sliding on rungs slick with algae. He thought of a lullaby in a hospital that had not housed any of his family. He thought of a mother breathing herself out of a fan. He did not turn off anything. The marbled, arranged darkness held. Then, slowly, it thinned at the edges. Night returned to itself. The stars in the ceiling went out as if someone had closed a book. The building exhaled, old concrete settling, a tap in a room 3 doors down, arguing with its own rust. The fluorescence blinked back. The ledger wrote one last line, then stilled. 3:20 a.m. Line completed. Route restored. He let out a breath he had not known he held. He turned. Hoa was watching him in the ordinary light, her uniform now imperfect, wrinkled in a human way, cuffs stained a little darker at the edges. The perfection had seeped out of her clothes. It made him colder and warmer at once. "You should go," she said. "The rain will want to start again once you are under it." He nodded. He gathered his coil, unplugged the loop as gently as a mother unhooks a child's sleeve from a nail. He stepped into the corridor, looked back once. She had already turned away, walking towards the pediatric ward with the posture of someone who has not finished a shift even though the clock declares otherwise. At the service door, he paused. He thought of leaving the key in the lock, some gesture of trust, but then he took it with him. Outside, the rain remembered itself and began, small at first, then insistently, as if to make up for lost time. The substation hummed with a tone that felt less like a complaint. He checked the analyzer. The band at 15. 777 kilohertzes had flattened into the general static of the world. The grid map on his handheld glowed green. District 5 held. No drop diamonds. He opened the van door and stopped. In the passenger seat lay a small, impossible thing, a hospital key on a length of cotton string, tag faded, number hand-lettered in blue ink, PEDS 2. He ran his thumb over the tag. It felt like paper that had remembered hands too long. He felt his chest loosen, something in the upper left unclenching, then seized again at the phone's buzz, unknown number. Then PHONG mortuary service line. He answered because he had no available superstition left to waste. Andui? The voice was his father's as he had last heard it on a good day, joking with light in his breath. Don't be stupid, it said fondly, which is what his father said when he loved him. Use both hands. Static filled the world like rain that forgot to fall. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, he found that, like the coil, his voice could be tuned to carry what it needed to carry. I'm here, he said. To the rain, to the city, to the service lines, to rooms that could hold a night forever and still want morning. I'm here. Across the lot, the old hospital held its shape as if the present had been nailed to it. Then, as if in answer to the city's breathing, a door he had thought he closed moved on its hinge. The corridor beyond it did not show a corridor, it showed a length of darkness, with a moving light at its end, like a train in a tunnel. Approaching with a humming he recognized from his own bones. The call crackled. The mortuary line went quiet, and from his own number, his phone rang again. Chapter 2. The Route. When the phone rang from his own number, the screen turned his face into a pale square. He could see the tunnel's light reflected in the glass. A steady, approaching glow. Not the sawtooth of lightning, not the fidget of fluorescence coming alive. Trains had a hum that belonged to rails even when you stood on dirt. This had that hum and something else tucked beneath it like a lullaby folded into metal. Hello? He said. His voice did not sound in his ear so much as in the concrete around him. The stairwell swallowed it and returned it dressed in someone else's coat. In the phone there was breathing, the faint crackle around nostrils of a tired man, then the click-tap-click of a lighter his father had used for 20 years to light mosquitoes on fire as a joke. Use both hands, the voice repeated, warmth riding admonition. You forget when you're afraid. Bah? Dewey said, and hated the smallness of his own hope. The line surged, static, cresting, and cut. The screen held his name over a starved battery icon. He lowered the phone, looked at the door he had not meant to leave ajar. The light at the end of its throat had settled. Not an oncoming headlamp, a waiting one. Behind him the hospital breathed like a creature that had learned to sleep again. In the pediatric ward something plastic creaked, the sound of a mobile remembering it could sway. Somewhere the ledger's page curled as ink dried into a sentence. The rain started up on the roof and failed to reach the windows for a second, as if reconsidering falling. He glanced down at the key in his other hand, the cotton string warmed by his palm. The faded tag read, Peds 2, blue letters tired of being legible, and yet present. He thought of leaving, of driving, of calling Quine, of using the word anomaly until it wore out and lay down on its back. Instead, he placed the Peds 2 tag against the metal of the service door, exactly where a human thumb always goes. Metal recognized the gesture the way an old dog recognizes a whistle. The hinge whispered the same syllable he had heard 1,000 times on 1,000 cabinets. Permission. The corridor inside the door did not belong to the hospital. It belonged to the wiser building beneath every building, the utility spine that stays when the skin changes. Concrete walls, unpainted, poured when someone believed in making forever. Overhead, between brackets stamped with dates from 3 different decades, cable trays ran like ribs. In the tray, bundled conductors, wrapped with gray tape like the bindings of old books. Dust lay in the corners where even ghosts did not stoop to clean. The light in the distance blinked once, testing its own patience, and settled back to steady. He followed, coil tucked into his jacket, head set over one ear. The loop antenna lay against his chest, like a stethoscope. The tuner hissed gently at 15,777 kilohertzes, as if the number could not forget to be itself just yet, and now and then looked over its shoulder at what it had been. He walked past a hatch that should have led to a boiler, but showed instead a kink in the world full of greenish glow like a pond at night. He passed a locked pharmacy door and smelled camphor no one had opened in 40 years. He passed a square that hummed the way a human throat does when it mumbles reassurance it doesn't believe, and knew it for the transformer vault, not by sight but by temperament. At intervals, small brass plates were bolted to the wall, their lettering shallow, the way a name is whispered in a church: Route C, Route D, Route 11 PEDs. Someone had drawn arrows beside them in pencil, then erased the arrows, then drawn them again. On one plate, faint and impatient, someone had scratched a single word with something sharp: home. You could spend your life maintaining a city and never see its sentences written to itself. Tonight, the city seemed to have tilted those private notes toward his eye. He reached the light. It was mounted to nothing. It burned where an intersection of corridors opened upon a depthless dark shaped like a doorway. The light did not illuminate the doorway so much as volunteer to keep it company. He stood in front of it with the PED's 2 key in his fist and felt what a man at the edge of a pier feels when he knows without sound that a boat is coming in. Andui. He turned. The nurse stood in the threshold behind him, haloed by the yellow of the hospital's practical bulbs. Her uniform had the same tiny human stains he had noticed before. The cuffs darkened, a loose thread at a pocket, the fold of a sleeve remembering a past arm. She had found a cardigan and pushed it half on, sleeve trapped at her elbow by haste or stubbornness. She looked older under the subterranean lights. No, not older, less preserved. You should be on the ward, he said. On duty. He is his Deus Diaforas. She smiled as if he had told a joke she would remember for later. The babies are sleeping. They learned the trick of deep sleep tonight and will keep it a while. So I came to see your train. She tilted her head at the light. The dead dislike to travel alone when they go in groups. It's really a train? It is what the city thinks a promise looks like. She touched the brass plate labeled Route 11 PEDs with her knuckle, the gentle tap teachers use on a desk between praise and correction. Also, a train. How do I? He began, then stopped. He had been making devices his whole life. He knew how doors worked. He put the keys tag back into his palm, applied pressure to the blank portion of the darkness where a plate might have been, and pressed. A clasp yielded with the surprise of something that had wanted to be used. The door opened. Inside, a tunnel did not so much appear as average itself around his presence. Metal and concrete, and that particular humid cool that surrounds machines that grew too large to be children. Rails ran true, 2 of them, into a curve. But they were not steel. They were something softened by use, the way bus bars are after 1,000 hands have felt their heat. Above, where catenary wires should have been, ran something like a spinal cord, bundles of line and memos and discarded electricity. The light he had seen belonged to a car. It waited not politely but professionally, the way the competent do. It had no driver, exactly only a front that looked like it knew where it was going. On its side, letters ghosted themselves. THAN PHONG SERVICE. Below that, a diagonal stripe the color of a ledger line. It smelled faintly of incense burnt at the wrong time of day. Hoa's expression altered, not into fear, but into the face someone wears when a ceremony begins and they realize They know the first line by heart without ever having been taught. She touched the cardigan sleeve trapped at her elbow and slid it free. "You ride, Ann H.," she said. "You don't? I am on duty. My post is here. For now." The phrase folded like paper in his chest. For now. He wanted to argue. He had learned tonight that he argued with what he loved by refusing its self-definition. He settled for nodding with the awkward gravity of acceptance. He stepped into the car. The seat wasn't a seat. It was a place that learned his weight and made room. The wall opposite wore a shelf with a metal box and a handle with the grease of other hands. A small bell hung from a strap because the city could not help but be sentimental, even when it pretended to be efficient. The coil in his jacket hummed as if happy to be on a vehicle that had read the same articles about resonance. He set the tuner on the shelf and clipped the loop to a brass stud that resembled, absurdly, a hospital bedpost. Hoa touched the door frame. "The route understands consent," she said. "It is old-fashioned that way. If you ride afraid, it will jolt. If you ride ready, it will ease your stomach. If you ride full of the wrong purpose, it will take you somewhere you didn't ask for and pretend not to hear your protests." "What is the right purpose?" "Hey, delivering breath." He exhaled, and the car, having waited exactly for that, began to move. It glided like a soft yes. The hum found his ribs and tuned them one notch lower, like a guitar being matched to a mother's voice, not to a metronome. The tunnel curved. On the walls, advertisement frames presented posters from no era he could place. A child swallowing stars under the slogan, "A route for every room." A woman with a screwdriver and a lantern at her belt, hair up under a nurse's cap, smiling at a breaker. A city map with veins drawn in a tender red that looked like a lover's planning. He saw the hospital fall away the way buildings do when you close a curtain and open another on the same window. The tunnel widened without admitting it had widened. He caught glimpses down branching corridors, an escalator whose steps were letters being pushed by invisible feet, a culvert in which rain ran upstream, a door with his name on it in a script too small for any eye. He didn't lean. He had learned the trick of the city tonight. If you looked too hard at certain things, they shrank to fit your insistence. The tuner, on the shelf, hissed, then spoke. Not numbers, but station names, old ones and current ones, beloved ones, the ones taxi drivers use and the ones maps pretend they don't. Ben Than, Cho Lon, Kai Lun, March Field, Nam Diao, Up Bak, Station 17. His father's voice kept taking the vowels between stations and polishing them. "Use both hands. Where are we going?" he asked aloud, because some doors only open when a sound triggers them. The car's headlamp intensified, as if affronted by his loss of faith, then settled. The bell on its strap chimed once without being touched. "To the marsh," he said to himself, surprised by the certainty. The car, pleased by his memory, accelerated. He had never seen the marsh from inside the city's throat. He had only clambered out there with his father to find poles that knew more about birds than people. In the rainy season, the place gained and lost names like a lyre. Lagoon, paddy, swamp, the land that arrived late. His father had gone out on a Thursday, light, falling and rising under the day like a tide. A misstep, they had said, a rung taken too fast. The man he had loved had reached for a cable with one hand while the other carried his bag, because men who know their work allow a small pride its teeth. He had fallen a height insufficient to kill someone who did not hit their head wrong on the way, which is exactly what he had done wrong. Dewey had dragged his memory away from the marsh 100 times, until the memory learned to sit and look out the window of his mind like a polite relative. Now the car brought him there without asking. It did not open to reed and frog and water noise. It opened to the utility room under the pole, a concrete cube on legs with a steel door tattooed with manufacturer names like a soldier's chest. It smelled as it had smelled that week: algae, hot dust, the faint chemical joy of new insulation. A naked bulb burned a lethargic orange. The coil in his jacket raised its head. His father stood with his back to him, hand on the panel, shoulders too easy, the blue shirt dark at the collar, not with sweat but with expectation. He was speaking to someone who was not there. "Hold it a second," the man said, and laughed at his own timing. "Just a second," I said. 9 minutes, 13 seconds, what's that? We go for tea. He made the small clicking sound with his tongue. He used to summon patience from wires. Con, the way he said the word child had always disgusted and delighted Di by arriving with a laugh. The way a man carries both love and exasperation into the syllable. Now the word struck him in the chests of all the selves he had been, and all of them made the same small shamed gesture of turning their face as if to sneeze. "Bah," he said, and the room, too smart, did not let his father hear it. He understood then that this was not a visitation. It was a route. Routes are for moving, not for conversing. The device he had made in the fan room had given a mother an exit. This one, older, more unkind, had given his father an endless walkway on which to rehearse a mistake that had loved him as much as he had loved his son. He opened the panel as he had the night of the hospital, and inside the box found not breakers, but a scrim of thickened light on which a set of instructions wrote itself and erased itself in the same motion: cut, test, restore, apologize, T. He put his palm against the definitions and felt heat, not from current, from memory. He set the loop in the space and felt it pluck a note he had carried in a pocket since he was an ungentle boy. He drew the tuner to 15.777 kilohertzes on the shelf. The car had turned into a workbench and heard the old number call to him like a neighbor who borrows sugar and always overpays in thank you. "Use both hands," he said, and this time the panel listened. He had always thought of the phrase as cautionary. Don't skimp the world with a one-handed job. Tonight, in the box that believed in verbs, he learned it also meant occupy both rituals at once. He put his right hand on the lever cut and his left on what the panel insisted on calling apologize. Nothing in an electric panel keeps a place for apology. Nevertheless, because the city had learned his family through his stubborn attention, the box had made a space for his second hand. He squeezed. He did not pull. "I won't cut," he said to a building that loved to hear what men declared in it. "I'll carry." In the pediatric ward, he had carried breath. Here, beneath a pole in a marsh that was inside a train that was under a hospital that no longer housed anyone, he carried weight, not death. Weight, the split second in which a man shifts from one footing to another and feels the extra dangerous pound of his task move toward the wrong edge. He took that weight into his right hand and did not turn. In his left, he held the thing his father had refused to let out loud. "I am afraid, and I love you, and I will embarrass myself if I say both." The room changed its pitch. The bulb hummed as if someone tuned a guitar in the next room, the very next room, and wanted to be heard doing it. The car behind him trembled with the kind of anticipation that loves to keep a straight face. On the floor, a small puddle shaped like Vietnam, made of condensation, gave up and broke its edges into a new country. His father shifted his shoulders, and something that had been stuck in the man's stance since the fall, since the sun unclenched by the width of a coin. The man neither turned nor listened, but the line running from his hand loosened like a noose that reconsiders its vocation and becomes a halo. The tuner coughed, then said, "THHHAOW, then Phong station receiving clear." The bell on the strap chimed twice. In the door, the one that had been concrete and was now a window, the car's headlamp brightened and then steadied in a way that made his ribs stop announcing themselves in fear each time he breathed. "Okay," he whispered, to the lever, to the apology, to the man who had failed at something important only once in his careful career, and had paid so dearly for it that the debt agency of the city kept sending him reminders even now. "Okay." He closed the panel. The room remained. His father took his right hand from the lever and slapped the left into his palm, habit adding itself to the pattern as it does. He turned enough to reveal a profile, the nose too aquiline for someone of his height, the mouth full in a way that made him look perpetually on the verge of a remark he would not make in company. "I'll be late," his father said, amused, to no one who had earned the joke. "Tell your mother I'll be late because I figured out a thing it took me too long to figure out." For a lunatic second, Dube believed his father would turn his full face to him, step across the false floor, clap him on the shoulder and say one of the sentences he had built houses for in his heart for almost 20 years. In that second, he loved the world and wanted to take it by the shoulders and beg, "Don't move." The bell chimed once. The car door slid open. The tunnel took a breath. His father lifted his hand in the general direction of the door as if waving to a neighbor at a distance. Then he stepped into a space the car offered him that was not the car and vanished gently, like a smell in Sunday. The bulb dimmed to the color of pineapple and settled. The panel showed a clean, stubborn word: restored. The marsh, which had not seen a train in its sentient memory, let the sound of rails moving through its body without protest. "Bah," he said, not for the room and not for the city, but for the stubborn boy in him who wanted to keep saying the word until the end of days. The room neither gave him back an answer nor refused him the dignity of asking. It sat with him as good rooms do, the way particular people can sit with grief without changing the subject. He did not cry. His family were not a crying family. The city did, very quietly, in its vents. The car closed its door with a comprehension that would have been smug if it were a person. It did not move until he placed both hands on the handle and said, "Take me back." When he did, it surged, as if a promise were at last in the right direction. They did not retrace exactly. The city hates to admit to circles. From the marsh they sank through soil that remembered feet more than roots. They rode through the belly of a stadium where a humming mass of people had once chanted a chorus that held the frequency of a beehive. They floated along a culvert where fish tried futures on like hats. They passed a room that contained nothing but a red chair, and in the chair sat a seamstress's shadow, mending a tear in the air. At a junction, a light blinked yellow where all others had been white. The car slowed. On the wall, a brass plate read, "Router motor coils." He heard distantly a song with no words, the teeth sound of gears, the kiss sound of belts, the small collective hum of machines that ever meant to serve. The car did not stop there. It paused only long enough for the bell to say politely, "Someone wishes to pass," and another bell, deeper, to respond, "After you." When they rose, if the word applied, they came to the hospital's service level, not by the door through which he had left, but by a different door with the same attitude. He stepped out into a corridor smelling of iodine and polite hopelessness. The light on the car's face inclined a farewell. The letters on its side, THAN PHONG SERVICE, faded as if embarrassed at being read. He turned to thank Hoa and found her standing 2 steps away, a paper cup in her hand. Steam rose from it as if water had not learned yet not to waste itself on lifting. Tea, jasmine, a smell that dared happiness. "You delivered breath," she said. And this time the praise came without instruction beside it. He delivered himself, he said, because he had learned that very night to give the right things to the right owners. "I only shifted weight." He could hear how the sentence made him sound like a man who had undeservedly come upon humility and was trying it on in the mirror, and he decided not to fuss at himself about it. She held out the cup. He took it. It tasted as all hot drinks in rooms that once held sickness do, too hot, then forgiving. "Will the city—" he stopped. He could not find the right verb. "Remember? Break? Change?" "It has already," she said. "There will be fewer 9-minute and 13-second requests. Not none. Requests pile up in houses with only one door, but the wider route is open now. Some have been waiting for years and will go all at once. Tomorrow traffic will be peculiar in District 5. People will say the street was thick with motorbikes and yet quiet. They will arrive and not be angry. A rare day." "And you?" "The ledger says my name now," she said, amazed as if she had read her name in an old, hard book and found it in a different hand than her own. It never did before. Tonight it wrote, "Hoa, shift completed." I didn't know I needed a sentence to finish being what I was being. She laughed. It did not sound like a nurse's laugh or like a ghost's. It sounded like a woman's laugh in the middle of a day that has started to go right. My mother will scold me for staying this late at work. Then she'll remember. He looked at her and saw that the cardigan sleeve she had struggled with earlier now hung properly. Her forearm no longer trapped in time. The cuff was damp. The dampness did not go further than it should, respecting her boundary. "It hurts," he said, surprised at the confession. "It hurts, and it is clean. I don't know a word for that." "Train." "We haven't made one yet," she said, "but we will." They walked toward the pediatric ward like two people leaving a movie too serious to talk after. The fluorescents hummed a domestic tone. A night attendant snored softly behind a desk, his head at the exact angle of a man who will not admit he is asleep even if you address him by name twice. In one of the wards, a child, truly sleeping, made the smacking sound of a person kissing and did not wake. The mobile of birds had turned and stopped, with a blue one looking at the door as if it had been put on guard. At the ledger desk, the book lay open of its own will. He leaned over it, because he had not yet lost the boy in him who liked to see his name in any book at all. The last entries were neat and carried the particular pressure that ink shows when it had to be obedient. 3:16 a.m. Complaint resolved. Technician present. Dewey. 3:20 a.m. Line completed. Route restored. Underneath, in the blank that would have been saved for tomorrow night's first request, a short sentence had appeared all on its own. The pen's cotton tether made the gesture of contentment of a dog settling in its circle. Then Phong, credentials accepted. The letters were not quite aligned. Whoever wrote from below did not adjust well to ink. "Credentials?" he said. "I didn't apply. They apply to you," Hoa said. "It's never fair how the city chooses your posts, but it is sometimes right." He did not ask what the post would ask of him. He had learned in 2 hours the limits of questions. He folded the PED's 2-tag string carefully, tied a half knot, then undid it. He left it on the desk. The tag looked relieved to be out of his pocket. It lay with the sturdy little aesthetic that a tool acquires when it has done its job. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "On market days," she said, as if scheduling an ordinary lunch. "When the route comes near, you will feel the air thin a little, only very pleasantly, right, where your sternum is cracked and healed." I'll nod. "And if the ledger writes my name when I'm not here, answer, or someone will call from your number to remind you." She grinned at his startled look, then sobered with clinical speed. "Don't let the habit of cutting take you. The city loves habits. It thinks habit is love because love repeats. Teach it that love also waits." The rain, which had been working through a paragraph of persistence on the roof, put a period on its sentence. Du's phone, the one that had held his voice a minute ago, the way a shell holds the sea, vibrated and showed a text from Quian without decoration. "D5 stable, you magician." "Hey, 01, he typed back. "Repairman," then deleted it, typed "on duty," deleted that, wrote "stable," and sent. The phone, obedient to meanings rather than syntax tonight, delivered what he meant. He walked to the service entrance and paused. The corridor held him just long enough to imprint the weight of seeing. He turned back. Hoa was where he had expected, not too near the door, because she would not make a joke of a threshold, not too far, because a person on duty makes distance do the working, not themselves. "Thank you," he said. "Go," she said. "Use both hands." He laughed aloud, short and good. He stepped out. The hospital door closed behind him with the sound the sea makes when it takes a wave back. Outside, the world smelled the way the street does in the moment after heavy rain relents. Diesel rinsed to sweetness, soil telling its jokes, 100 meals starting fresh in 100 kitchens. He drove toward the dispatch center on streets that looked tinted, as if the monsoon had put a film in the air to soften edges. The city's map on his handheld stayed green, the green of approval. The analyzer's thin, pesky making of 15.777 kilohertzes had become a smear, the color of chalk rubbed away. In front of a temple he liked to pass, old men were already sweeping the street with ridged brooms, pushing leaves toward a philosophy they did not bother to explain. On a balcony above a garage, a woman shook out a blanket and laughed with the seriousness of mourning. A motorbike passed him loaded with buckets of little fish that blinked at the dawn as if it had caught them rather than the other way around. He parked in the municipal lot and walked through a lobby that had never been awake at this hour. The security guard, a woman with a face like a perfectly made bed, nodded as if she had known him since he was a teenager. "Raining," she said, as if it were new. "In the exact right places," he said, and they both pretended it was a normal exchange. On the 18th floor, the dispatch center hummed with saved energy, the hum of a room that does not have to prove itself at the moment. Quian sat where she always sat in the hour the night decides whether to admit morning exists. Her coffee steamed up the kind of smell that told you what chemicals thought about the human hope of taste. She raised her eyebrows and mimed a magician's flourish. Both hands. "District 5, she said. "Stable," he echoed his early alive modesty and found it had turned into truth on the way down the hall. "We should write a note for the morning team." Right. Stop sacrificing chickens to the ghost of Station 17 and check your cable harnesses. Also, he said, realizing as he spoke, we should change the test protocols. Critical wards, no cuts for tests. We'll do simulated load with negative injection, no service interruptions. Make it policy. He heard the curt efficiency in his own tone and did not apologize to it. Policy was what cities learned from people who had stayed too long on a shift. Quyen sat forward. She eyed his face the way you look at a socket you've gotten zapped by once before and now trust roughly anyway. What happened? An old thing finished leaving. He typed as he spoke, sending notes to the shared board, tagging the earnest supervisor who believed in bullet points as penance. We had been holding its door wrong. You speaking in temple, NH. I've had a night. He glanced at the clock. 4:18 a.m. The city's pulse on the panels had turned from amber to a considerate green, like the low lighting in a train when everyone is asleep. Don't go near Station 17 with coffee. It will drink it and lie about it, Quyen snorted. She watched him a beat longer than the joke required. You look like you took a long call. I did, he said, from a number I know well. He held up the phone. The last calls displayed themselves unknown. Then Phong Service, die. He had the wild thought that if he tapped his own name, it would call some important office in his chest. He didn't try it. They wrote the note to the morning team. He added the language about apologies that would make no difference to anyone who hadn't been there. For interruptions beyond 60 seconds, someone from electrical must remain physically present to receive any complaints. Apologies are to be offered in person whenever possible. The city reads your posture. He almost deleted the last line, then left it. The morning supervisor would think it a metaphor and feel briefly sophisticated. The ones who had learned would recognize it as instructions. When he had signed his name, the system flickered, and the words THAN PHONG, credentials accepted, appeared beside his signature, then vanished. Quyen blinked. New plug-in? Legacy, he said. You're weird today. She looked at him with the mingled affection and professional curiosity of a nurse for a frequenter of the emergency room who is not quite a patient. Go nap, NH. The city gossips less when you aren't listening. He almost stayed. Work had become a place the night would find him easily. Instead, he took the elevator down to the parking lot's simple confidence and drove toward his mother's apartment on a street lined with tamarind that always managed to be the right color for whatever season Saigon pretended to have. The stairwell smelled of paint grown old and loyal. He climbed 2 flights, paused to let his heart catch the news that he was doing something ordinary, then knocked. The door opened before his knuckles arrived. His mother had always been economical about distances. Khan, she said, and her voice did what his father's had done in the panel. It loosened something hard, as if the syllable were a key. You're wet. He was dono. The rain stood in the right places, he said, hearing Hoa's phrasing on his own mouth and letting it stay. She made him sit. She made tea. She stared at him while the water boiled with the eyes of someone reading a beloved book backwards to see the tricks. You look like you spoke to your father. He did not answer at first, because answering had always made him feel like a child in the wrong scene. He found the courage with a new muscle he trusted more the less he understood it. He told me to use both hands. About time, she said, turning to hide the bravado of relief behind the plainness of cabinets. He never remembered to say the thing and show the thing in the same hour. Always separate, we had to sew them together. He watched the kettle gather itself. He thought of the tunnel's headlamp deciding, the car's bell scolding gently, the marsh's bulb turning pineapple, and forgiving a mistake across decades. He thought of the ledger, writing the name of a woman who could finally stop being mostly an occupation and become a daughter again. The outages will stop, he said, not as a promise his city had taught him not to make many, but as a report. If they come again, it will be different. Everything is always different. She set the tea before him. Even the same, he drank. It tasted of childhood and of a new metal he had not used before. He looked at his hands. They did not shake. He placed one atop the other and felt what fatigue feels like when it's earned rather than imposed. He slept there, head against his forearm, for exactly 9 minutes and 13 seconds. When he woke, he laughed at no one, astonished that the joke had come to him and he had not had to chase it. At 3:07 the next morning, the city did not go out. It leaned lightly, a small tilt, the way a ship reminds you of the water it moves through. Somewhere, a mother followed a thread of someone else's breath out of a wall. Somewhere, a man under a pole took his hand off a lever and discovered apology made him lighter, not smaller. Somewhere, a nurse put a cardigan on both arms and went home to be scolded by her mother with the exact phrasing she had longed for and had not known. On the 18th floor, the panel glowed green. In the ledger, under a new date, there were fewer lines, and one of them read, "No complaints, babies slept," on a corridor wall between brass plates that had lost interest in impressing anyone. Someone had written in pencil and not erased it, "When in doubt, wait." Another hand had written beneath it in a different pencil, "And breathe." He carried the coil in his jacket for a week, out of superstition, and then out of fondness. He tuned it once, at dusk, and heard nothing he could interpret, only the city, dense and affectionate, making thousand-voiced nonsense to itself, like a fountain that has learned language and forgotten it again with enthusiasm. After that, he kept it in a drawer near where he kept his spare keys. Sometimes his phone rang from his own number. Once it was pure static, like rain inside metal. Once it was his father laughing at a joke someone else had told in another room. Once it was nothing, and he understood that nothing was the point. He kept answering anyway, to practice. On a Saturday he parked near the old hospital because he had not left something there, but because he had picked up a way of walking that liked to be exercised. The building looked almost handsome in morning. Workers at a site a block away were dismantling something with reverence, like picking the bones of a fish for a child. He went to the service door because he wanted to see it be a door. It opened to a supply cupboard full of mops. He stood in front of it and laughed like a man at a magic show who knows how the trick goes and applauds with both hands. On the shelf, wedged among coils of cotton string, sat a brass plate the size of his palm, unbolted, a double row of holes along one edge. Lettering. Route home. He picked it up and felt along the back with his thumb. Tape. A note. Folded. He unfolded it. The handwriting was tidy and took joy in its own existence. A nurse's hand. Market day, it read. Go buy lotus seeds for your mother. Do not let the city eat your entire life. It doesn't even like sweet things. At the bottom, not a signature, but an instruction written as a memory. I nodded. He looked up and saw her, reflected in the cupboard's chrome bucket, walking down the sidewalk outside in ordinary clothes, a basket on her wrist. She did not look in. She looked at the road with the particular concentration it deserves. He did not run to her. He did not shout. He carried the note to his pocket and obeyed it. On the market street, he bought lotus seeds. He bought too many. He did not mind. He stood in a patch of mourning between stalls and watched old women debate ginger with the seriousness of generals in a book. He felt his chest, where the cracked and healed bone made spooky weather predictions, and discovered the ache that had nested there had moved its furniture out overnight. He went home along a route that had never once appeared on any map and would not now. He used both hands to carry the bag. He had stopped thinking of this as a chore and started thinking of it as a habit that knew the difference between itself and love. At noon, children rode motorbikes past his window in a procession that made no sense and therefore belonged to a holiday. The city, which excels at holidays even when it can't remember the reason, hummed in the tenor that means, "We will repeat this for years and complain with ferocious pride each time." At night, around the hour he had learned to pretend he did not expect things to happen, his phone buzzed with a message from a number that read as blank, in the way a face can read as belonging to a crowd and to itself. "Thank you." It was not signed. He wrote back, "You're welcome," then added, without planning, "Good night." The phone found the right rooms to carry it to. Somewhere, under a hospital that had learned to be two things on alternating days, a ledger dog-eared a page. Somewhere, in a tunnel that did not want to call itself a tunnel, a bell chimed once, decorously, because that is what bells do when the night changes responsibly. Somewhere, in a dispatch center, a screen that had been taught patience blinked a cheerful green and stayed that way for the length of a song. The city slept the sleep of a patient whose monitors show what nurses call textbook. It rolled, it woke, it misbehaved, it apologized in ways that required two hands to recognize. He learned the work of the day shift again, one coil at a time. He visited the marsh when he wanted to have an excuse to stand between worlds and watch birds choose air over water on a whim. He answered when the ledger wrote his name, and when it did not, he left his window open at night to hear the backup sky hum to itself, content not to be needed. On a Tuesday 3 weeks after the outage stopped, a skinny boy on a motorbike braked too abruptly at a light near THAN Phong Dao and spilled his crates of eggs. They went in all directions like a slapstick. People laughed and caught them with both hands. Almost none broke. The boy sat on his heels and put his head down and made the short, out-of-fashion sobbing noise boys make when the world sneaks up on their dignity with a broom. A woman in a nurse's cardigan put a hand on his back without ceremony, rubbed once, and went on without waiting to be thanked. Dewey saw the whole thing because he was stopped at the same light and paying attention to nothing particular with fierce skill. He lifted a hand in automatic recognition toward no one and everyone. In the tangle of humanity and eggs, he recognized the city he had chosen and felt it recognize him back. He did not need it to say his name. He had his own voice, tuned to the room he was in. He went home. He made tea with his mother and told her nothing with the precision of a man who did not need to be believed to be loved. At 3:07 a.m., the fan on the ceiling made its trustworthy circle. No train entered his walls unless he meant it to. When he fell asleep, his last thought was not a prayer or a plan, but a sentence that fit neatly in his mouth, as if it had been waiting somewhere cheap and marvelous for the right tongue to carry it. "I am here." The city, hearing him, allowed itself a small smile. And because it is incapable of doing any gesture with only one function, it let that same smile become a slight pressure change in a tunnel somewhere under a hospital, which a bell answered in kind. A bright, polite acknowledgment, not urgent, not grave, only true. In the ledger, In handwriting that had learned the trick of scarcity, a new day began. There were lines reserved for complaint and for resolution. Beneath them, one spare entry had, for no reason anyone could explain, become standard. Root, open, breath, available. And use both hands.